we are here tonight with our favorite science consultant, Rich Bacalor. He's one of the mighty science team at Wayne Risa, so we're really lucky to have him here tonight to share with us a little bit about fostering inquiry in remote settings.
So thanks for inviting me, Michelle and Laura, to this literacy focused session. So first, let's do a little check-in. I can see your names, which is great, but tell me what subject you teach, or what subject and grade or subject that you teach, and also what would your favorite superpower be? And I'll go first, and there's a prop here, don't freak out, but science is my superpower. So in the chat, what is your science, or what is your superpower? Transportation. Ooh, Arabic, very good one. Motivation, excellent one for a Monday. Able to manage Zoom meetings with small children. Great math, super strength. I don't know, man, the COVID pounds. All right, looks like we have a really good mix of folks in the room today, so this should be fun. Keep those coming. First grade, all subjects. We had a range of grades, also good. Just a little bit more too about myself. So I spent the first 20 years of my career teaching middle school science in the South Redford School District. And then for the last 4 years, I've been doing the science consulting. So at RISA on the science department, I tend to stick with the K-8 material more often. And then we have a couple people that are more middle and upper grades. So thank you guys for coming. We're just gonna keep cruising through here. One more little check-in, and Michelle's gonna put up a poll because we gotta take care of ourselves. It was a heck of a weekend. So how are you feeling today? And Michelle, can you just put up that little quick poll, and let's see how the group is today. Your choices are 1 to LeBron. So take a minute. Let us know how you're feeling. All right. Looks like some Monday numbers up there. So we're a little in the middle, slightly doing okay. Whoever the one is, I hope your day gets better. And I guess that's up to me right now, so that's no pressure there. But all right, so here's one of the questions that Michelle asked me to talk about is how do we keep teaching science inquiry during a pandemic? I think it's a pretty important question, right? And one of the things we've been working on, or at least one of the things we were asked to do at the beginning of this, is everybody pick priority standards because you're going online and you don't have time to do everything. Well, my position on that is the NGSS has been around for a while now, and it really is our priority. Like, we're living through a pandemic, and this was actually called out in 2017 in the run-up to some of the NGSS. We really need a more science literate community. And I'm going to guess, okay, just since the beginning of the shutdown and this pandemic, that a lot of people can read the information that's out there, but they're not doing a very good job of applying it, right? Or applying what they know. And so that's kind of where we come to with inquiry. And oddly enough, that word first entered our lexicon in terms of the science education way back in the 50s. And at that point, for the history majors in the room, we were gearing up to fight the Cold War, right? And Sputnik. And so inquiry became this thing that was infused into the curriculum at that point, and it's been around for quite a while. So one of the questions is, all right, well, how do we do inquiry? I mean, what does that even mean? And NGSS really treats it in a fairly specific way, right? In 3 dimensions. Now, quick little, let's get rid of the bad news, like get that out of the way, right? Anybody want to guess what this is about? What this graph shows? Anybody want to unmute and guess? Nobody? Okay, well, you may be able to, oh, do we have a guess?
I just know what it's like when nobody says anything, but I have a figured out the answer yet.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth. I appreciate it. All right, so the answer is this is the amount of time that's spent um, on different content levels in K-5 classrooms. Okay, um, and so when we look at that, and we're making priority standards, right? Priority standards. One argument is that the time that we have in class has already prioritized the standards, and the standards are ELA and math, right? And my question to this group, and as we kind of go forward, is all right. Well, how's that working out, right? Or how do we deal with a pandemic if that's the case, right? So just to kind of get the juices running, and thinking about, like, okay, how do we keep teaching science 20 minutes a day, right? If that's the case in your building, we might need to rearrange some priorities, and hopefully we'll see some ways to do that today. All right. Another thing that we've been looking at, and this is from West Ed, at the beginning or at the end of last year, right, going into the summer, they surveyed about 350 middle school teachers, and they asked the teachers, what instructional methods were you able to use during the first part of the shutdown? All right, and this is not a condemnation or anything. This was crisis teaching, so take that into account when you look at these numbers. But when you see the results, right, and you can kind of compare this with your own experience, is some of the more inquiry-based practices, right, whole group discussions or doing investigations, kind of got pushed to the bottom, right? And some of the more direct teaching methods get pushed up to the top. And again, that was because of obviously the nature of the closures. But moving forward, we have to like rearrange that, right? We have to change this back to having kids more engaged in an inquiry-based, in a more inquiry-based science community. Okay, so another quick check-in. Given time as a barrier, given some of the online challenges, take to the chat for a minute. What are the other barriers that we face in teaching inquiry level or inquiry style science? And you don't have to be a science teacher to answer that question. What barriers do you see, or do you experience? Let's take a minute and put those answers in the chat. Yeah, so some of the barriers we've got: behavior management, opinions, language barriers, technology barriers, buy-in from colleagues, materials to do experiments, yep, supplies, resources. Yeah, absolutely. And Constance is bringing up another point, right? How do we authentically explore phenomena, and not just watch videos? Yeah. And I would have to say, like, just briefly, like, those are all real challenges that we face, and there's not one good solution to any of that yet. But one thing, I think somebody said, it was talking about convincing colleagues that engaging in phenomena-based sciences is an important thing to do, right? And so one thing, especially as we've seen how people have dealt with the pandemic, right? And I mentioned this before, is that there's a big misunderstanding about science in terms of the scientific method, right? There is no one scientific method. And the other aspect of that is we often say, like it's the gospel truth, learn to read, then read to learn. But that's not actually how scientists work, right? They do read to learn, but that's only a small fraction of what they actually do. They do way more reading, writing, speaking, and listening in other contexts that are not necessarily just the scientific method, right? So I wanted to show you just a quick video that demonstrates what I mean by that. Okay. Oh, shoot. I'm going to have to stop sharing and I think I forgot to click the sound button. Sorry about that. Okay. Hopefully you can hear this.
A couple of years ago, a group of citizen scientists from the Western Cave Conservancy discovered a large, odd-looking spider in a cave in southern Oregon. They sent it to scientists in California. Recently, those scientists declared that spider a new species, Trogloraptor, and a member of a new family of spiders. Sounds straightforward, right?
Wrong.
Science definitely is not a linear step-by-step fashion. And science is unpredictable. It's dynamic. And I don't think it ever concludes. It just keeps going.
To communicate the real process of science, Judy and her colleagues developed this science flowchart to better explain how science works.
You may start in one area and you find the need to communicate with the community of scientists that you work with who might have additional or other ideas, and all of that helps to shape what science is and how we go about the process of science.
So let's take a look at the Trogloraptor discovery flowchart. It's less like a linear process and more like a pinball machine. Let's follow the path using the spider that the citizen scientists found as the pinball. They sent it to scientist Tracy Audizio, who is very curious about what lives in caves. She examined it for about 2 hours one night, trying to identify it by making observations and conferring with a colleague. They were stumped. The two researchers worked with the Academy's Charles Griswold and brought the specimen to him. He began his own observations.
I looked at it through the vial, not under a microscope, and I thought, oh, this is a brown recluse. It's about the same size, but when I looked at it closely, all the brown recluse characters, that is, various details of its anatomy, were wrong. The eyes were placed in the wrong arrangement. The jaws were wrong. The spinning organs were wrong. Everything about it was wrong.
Science often comes down to trial and error. The scientists shared ideas, and then...
Well, first we went to the books, and it didn't fit anything. After that, we carefully compared the new spider to descriptions of all spider families known in the world today, and we also consulted books on fossil spiders.
Along the way, the researchers made hypotheses about what this spider was and what it wasn't. Charles looked at the Academy's collections and others.
The more we looked at it, the more we realized that the details were wrong for every.
Okay, so I think you get the idea, right? And for sake of time, we're just gonna keep rolling through this because I actually want us to do a little. I actually want us to do a little bit of science. So how about some M&M science, right? One of the things that was mentioned is you have to have a problem to solve. You have to have a phenomenon, and some of our colleagues in the chat kind of mentioned this. So I want to do a quick one, and we'll see that if the idea is inquiry leads, right, and then kids can engage in reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and some of those critical literacy practices, then we're moving in the right direction, right? We want my sort of mantra is let's get away from just read about science, right, or watch a video about science and actually figure out stuff. Because I think that's where the most engaging literacy practices are, whether you're dealing with little kids or all the way up to more disciplinary literacy in the high school range, right? So I'm gonna, this is the idea, right? So you can make up whatever kind of little story you want about this, but mine is I'm very clumsy, and as Michelle knows, I love to have little bowls of M&Ms sitting around while I work. It's just the thing. And one day I was having a little bit of tea, so I had some hot water, and I spilled all my M&Ms into the hot water. Oh my gosh, what do you think happened? So take a minute in the chat. What do you think happened when I accidentally dumped my M&Ms into the hot water? melted. Hot chocolate. All of the colors blended together. They blended together. The water started changing color. Made hot chocolate. All right. Well, we got some good guesses up there. And there's a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to do this kind of like old school on the whiteboard. So here's what I want you to do. So as I'm going to actually try this out because I actually have the stuff in front of me. And what I want you to do on a sheet of paper or on a little scrap note somewhere, I want you to write down, what do you see? What do you think is happening? And then also, very, very important, what are you wondering about? What questions do you have when you see this happen? All right, so I'm just going to dump a couple of, this is NGSS colors first, okay? So we'll try that. Throw some more in there. Maybe another orange one. I don't really like the brown ones, so I'm going to leave those out. So I got some M&Ms in there. And I got some hot water. You're just going to have to trust me that it's hot. I'll pour it in there. Oh, wait. See, we got our predictions, all right? So let's just check this out and see what happens. Huh. Can somebody unmute and tell me what you see?
I say I can see it too.
I can see
The
it.
colors are bleeding out.
So the colors are bleeding out?
Yep.
The colors are also blocking. Like
What do you mean by blocking?
they're not mixing with one another.
They're not mixing, right.
They're not mixing, are they?
I don't see any chocolate. I thought they'd melt.
Huh. So no chocolate yet.
I wonder why they're not mixing.
Oh, we have a good question. Why are they not mixing yet? Do we have any other questions about that?
I'm wondering if the water will cool off before it's able to melt the chocolate.
Will the water cool off before it melts the chocolate?
I'm wondering if the colors, like if this is a stupid question, I'm not sure, but if
There's no stupid questions in science.
if the colors have a different density, if that is why they're not mixing.
Oh, well, say more about density. What do you mean by that?
Like they're, I don't want to say weight because it's not really, because they're not weighing anything right now, but like if their brightness or their, I don't know how else to say density. But you kind of get what I'm saying, not like weight, but like if they're less dense or more dense than one, that's why they're not mixing, maybe.
Is that called being opaque or something?
Yeah, like
see
something
through and not see through.
See.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Oh, it's floating up.
There's a side view.
Okay.
All right, well, you guys, we have some really good observations, and they still not really mixing, right? I start to see a little bit of brown showing through, so something else is happening, right? But now we got to gather up some more of these questions. So I'm going to pause that, go back to my other thing here. And let's see where this takes us. All right, so we had some noticings, we had some wonderings, and we had some thinks, right? So what do you think was happening? Anybody want to unmute and share out on that real quick?
There was a reaction with the dyes or the type of color dye.
Okay, so there's some kind of reaction with the dye. Somebody else mentioned that the water would the water get cooler? So does anybody have any thoughts about the water?
I think maybe the longer that they were sitting in there, yes, the water's going to cool off, so maybe the chocolate won't melt because of it being in there a little bit longer. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay. So there's a time and a temperature thing that we're thinking about.
Well, I also think that the coating needs to kind of react with the water before the chocolate can melt. It's almost like a protective barrier.
Okay, so the coating went first, and then the chocolate. Yeah. All right. So you guys, here's the thing about that. Sort of back into teacher hat for a moment. Oops, what am I doing? In the NGSS version of inquiry, right? We want to have a phenomenon that every kid has access to. Somebody earlier brought up the idea of language, right? Well, if we start our lesson and we want to connect it with something real world, something that the kids that's relevant to the kids' lives, right? And now, candy post Halloween might be a fun time to do something like this, but we really want to put it into even a bigger context than that, because this is really a nice little standalone activity, but we really want the students engaged in a phenomena that has a little bit more richness to it, right? Because on the big scale of things, these are big ideas, right? The temperature of the water changing. People mentioned the reaction, right? What happens to different types of materials when they go into hot water? That could be part of a bigger unit, right? So we want to get away from just sort of like standalone, fun, cute activities and move them into things that are going to matter, something relevant, and something that the kids are going to have to take some serious time to invest investigations on. So in an NGSS way, it looks kind of like this, right? So there's something in the natural world, and that's where earlier the barrier about having materials, this is a really good time to base your science lessons on things that kids have around the house. Whether that's in their house doing baking, cooking, or other things like that, or in and around their house, right, in the yard kind of stuff. So we want to make sure that the phenomena that they're investigating is something that is real world to them, and not just something fun. The next connection that we make, though, to literacy is really once they've engaged with that, we really want them then to enter into some more investigation practices. And that's where these questions that I had you write are really, really important, right? And then after that, the next part of that is we go into sense-making practices. What actually happened? What evidence do we have? And what evidence do we need to make sense of what just happened, right? So big scale, that's what it looks like, right? And what I would do if I had more time for this is we would actually have you guys model this out, right? We would have you draw this out and say, this is what we think is happening with the hot water and how it's impacting the M&Ms, and this is what we predict this is what we're saying is happening. And then we would have to test that further. And what I'm saying, the case I'm making is that each of those little steps within the investigation is an opportunity for literacy, a really deep dive into literacy, because there is so much reading, writing, speaking, and listening that happens in pursuit of the answer to that question, right? So where do we get lessons like that? Well, one thing that we can do immediately without changing a single thing is to start looking for the cross-cutting concepts. And we can do that from books, from events, current events. We can do that from basically anywhere, because these cross-cutting concepts are sort of like entry points. They're ways that no matter what the content is, whether you're talking about biology or physics or chemistry or earth science, these themes or these cross-cutting concepts run through them all, right? So I saw this really, really cool lesson about structure and function using Charlotte's Web as the starting point. And then the kids, so this was it was a fictional text, right? But they started talking about the structure and the function of the web of the spider. And then they started investigating, okay, well, what do real spiders look like? What are real spiders doing? And that was a really nice connection without doing anything else by using the cross-cutting concepts, right? So I would encourage you guys to do that. And then the second part is, again, if we're getting away from this, like, inquiry is doing the scientific method, right? And you don't have time to do the entire scientific method because it doesn't actually exist anyway, then how can we engage students in different practices that are also building literacy and science at the same time, right? So, you know, going back to the sort of the spiders, first of all, you guys asked a whole bunch of questions, right? And when you start asking questions, it leads you into using the other practices in ways that if we start with just a topic, right? Like we used to start with topics. When we start with phenomena and questions, now we have opportunities to engage in multiple practices, not just one, right? So that's another way, without changing anything else in your curriculum, to really get at the inquiry and the literacy at the same time. Engage in practices. And I would start personally, asking questions is number one, and then modeling is another great starting point, which also gets at text features, right? And students reading each other's text. And then third is argumentation, right? So these discussions that we have where kids are actually engaging in arguments about evidence and what things mean, really key points, right? And again, if you just tie back to what's happening in our world today, we need kids to start doing that from the very beginning, right? So that by the time they are adults and they have some science literacy, you know, I'm just going to say it. We wouldn't be in the situation we are right now if we had kids or we had adults that were a little more inclined to argue from evidence, right? So those are things that we want to foster in kids from the get-go, right? A nice way to deal with questions is the question formulation technique. And I know I'm like running way over time, so I'm just going to rush through the stuff. But question formulation technique, and there's a link later in the slides to this, but a really nice way to help kids practice asking questions. And you can have them do this on their own and then use your synchronous time. You know, if you present a phenomenon, have kids process and ask questions using the technique. They can bring their questions back and then you can organize them together. All right. And then another connection to this is our questions often lead us into using certain practices, right? So if you think back to the spider example from the scientist, they did check their books, right? They went to their text, their I guess, I don't know if you'd call that a mentor text, but they went to their key texts first, right? And we want kids to do that, but we want them to have a reason for doing that, right? Let the inquiry drive them to the books that they need. And I know Michelle and I have had lots of talks about kids choosing books, right? We want to give kids voice and choice in their books. Well, what if the science inquiry drove them to choosing books, right? I think that would be sort of magical in a way, right? And so when you have their questions in hand, then you can start organizing. Okay, well, why don't we make a model of this? Why don't we create an investigation of this? You can drive them to certain practices because certain questions lend themselves to different practices, right? So again, another nice tool that we've used, and Michelle and I did a session on this earlier, which is recorded somewhere. I can't remember where, but I'm sure Michelle will put that up, around the driving question board or a clues chart, right? So we've updated the clues chart for Science Purview Learned, but we've updated that and expanded it into what is our phenomena? What are we trying to figure out? Now, what do we already know about it? What do we claim? What are our claims about what we think is happening? What's our evidence? What are we wondering? And then what science words, right? Getting back to the language development, what science words or concepts help us explain this? And we always want to do activity, right? Doing, talking before we get reading, writing, and using vocabulary. Because nobody really learns a word unless they have a concept for the word first, right? So we want to have them develop concepts and get away from front-loading vocabulary, right? Front-loading vocabulary essentially gives us a false sense of security in terms of what we think kids understand because they use the word. But oftentimes they can use the word and not really know what it means, right? So a couple other things that I'm just going to share, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, there are some really nice ways to do inquiry on the Open SciEd website. So they have a whole link on remote teaching and keeping those inquiry pieces intact, even though you're doing remote learning. And two teachers from Connecticut shared with me they're using the way that they've used Jamboard to keep using these sort of inquiry principles in terms of their online learning. So there's a link to that video as well. Hi, welcome to our science. And then finally, if you're really interested in seeing some very timely and very appropriate lessons, again, the Open SciEd folks worked with researchers in epidemiology and education to come up with these. I think there are about 10 to 14-day units at different grade levels based on questions such as, what can we do to keep our community healthy? How do we make decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities? And then for the high school level, the question is, how can we prevent the spread of the disease, right? So, those are some really neat units that are put together. Again, all materials that are found around the house, and those are nicely set up to continue to do the inquiry plus the literacy, and they've even tied those to some of the C3 frameworks as well. So take a look at those nice examples. Here are the links to the clues chart, the drive-in question board, and the question formulation technique that we kind of went through very quickly. And as we say in science, like science isn't really, we don't really say eureka. We say, huh, that was interesting. And so if you had something that like jumped out at you and was interesting and you need to talk or you'd like to talk more, that's not my email address, but I'm happy to stick around and answer questions or go into the breakouts.